News.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Valencia province in Spain, where the number of people killed in flash flooding has climbed to 158. As a major search operation for survivors continues, a baby is winched to safety. But as the worst-hit areas grapple with the scale of the catastrophe, a warning that there's more torrential rain on the way.
Also ahead on Sky News at 10 tonight, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor hit the road to sell their budget, but the pound falls and the cost of borrowing rises as markets react. Meanwhile, farmers warn that changes in the budget to inheritance tax could spell the end of family farms. Plus, more than 400 alleged victims and witnesses come forward about the behavior of Mohammed Al-Fayed. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Hello, good evening from Santa Marina in Valencia in Spain, where the number of people killed in flash flooding has risen significantly today to at least 158. Major search and rescue operations are continuing, with the country's Prime Minister warning that people are still trapped in cars following the floods that have devastated parts of the country after heavy rainfall. And tonight, people living in some of the worst-hit areas are being told to brace themselves for more torrential rain. Well, Well, there are new weather warnings for parts of the southwest and the eastern coasts, with parts of Andalusia and Valencia set to experience the worst of the coming rain. Valencia is already the worst hit region. This is rainfall it's seen over the last 24 hours. The towns which have borne the brunt are concentrated underneath La Rambla del Pollo, which is the main drainage channel off the river Turia. It's funneled water into nearby areas. The town of Chiva saw an entire year's worth of rain fall in just 8 hours. And satellite imagery from the European Space Agency shows the scale of the damage. This was Valencia earlier this month. And this shows the same area after the rains came. In a moment, we'll hear from our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, who's been to Algemesí, which is south of Valencia. But first, Sky's Adam Parsons reports from Paiporta, the worst affected district in southern Valencia.
The scale of destruction in this region is breathtaking. Homes ruined, lives wrecked. Cars are strewn all over these roads, and the number of deaths has crept up remorselessly. Paco is stunned. He showed us the damage to his workshop business. This is how high the water got, he said, up to the black marks on the wall. We've lost the business, all of these cars. We lost everything because of the flooding. We've been ruined. These girls want to show us this. Their father is now a hero. He rescues someone when this street turned into a river. The man struggling to stay alive is a local. He's called Luis. A rope is thrown to him and he clings on desperately. You can sense his desperation and hear the shouts of encouragement. And eventually, he is pulled up to safety, a survivor. What bewildered people here was the suddenness.
It was horrible and too fast. All happens too fast. In just 1 minute, water comes from nothing to up to 2 meters high.
This is the town that was hit hardest, Paiporta, where dozens have been killed. Well, here's a very good gauge of what happened here. They've spent the morning pumping out this garage, but look, the water is still about 1 metre deep and everything there is ruined. Now, as this torrent came through here, it threw all these cars together and this road is completely blocked. But this story isn't about possessions. At the end of this row of houses, there was a couple who were caught in their car when the water rushed through, and they both drowned. Every road is scarred. Cars were simply thrown around by these floodwaters. This was nature at its most vicious, leaving the residents here desperate for help and reassurance.
I want to tell you that the government of Spain is here to provide you with any additional resources you may need. I said it yesterday. We are not going to leave the Valencians alone. We're going to be with you for as long as it takes.
Rebuilding this destruction will take years. More bodies are still being found. But there are slivers of hope. A baby winched to safety from the wreckage of her home. But it is a fleeting moment of joy in a day of awful sadness. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Paiporta in eastern Spain.
Well, as people here brace for more rain, there's a sense of anger among some that more warnings were not given ahead of the flash flooding. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins has been speaking to people in Algemesí, which is just south of Valencia.
In Algemesí, people are angry. This suburb of Raval was one of the worst hit, but residents feel abandoned. When the alert came, the water was already 2 meters high, shouts Carolina. There was no police, firefighters or the mayor. No one came to rescue us. The distress is echoed street after street. Every home is in ruins, their owners heartbroken. Dolores shows us inside her house. She said the water was up to the ceiling.
This is the kitchen.
Because no help came, they've had to hammer holes in the walls to clear the mud. I feel awful. I'm terrified and very afraid. My husband's sick. We need more help, she says. The level of destruction is immense. On the street, we meet Noel with his kids. Yesterday, they have nothing to eat. They're helpless. Right now, there are people who are trapped. The mud's up to their waists, so they can't open the doors. I live on a high floor, so I didn't have a problem with flooding. But I don't have water, light or food, he says. There's a growing feeling of desperation. Someone shouts food, and people grab what they can. There's so much destruction here, and at a time when people are at the most at need, they feel frustrated and alone. In a nearby shelter, we meet people from Algemessi made homeless by the flood. Carol's never felt so hopeless. There was a tree trunk that came into the front of my house. There's no walls, there's no ceilings. I don't have anything. There's nothing, she cries. The trauma of this natural disaster has been compounded in the aftermath by a feeling of loss and loneliness.
Well, let's talk to Siobhan now, who's in nearby Lucidia tonight. And Siobhan, what is the feeling there now? There's been more rain this evening. People there must be very fearful about what's to come.
Yeah, I think that's right. On paper, things are still dangerous in that there are still weather warnings in place, orange and yellow. Now, the worst is red, so it has got slightly better, but that's not going to do anything to calm the nerves of people living here. If you have a quick look behind me, you might be able to see, even though it's dark, that the water has come back here in the street. That's after just maybe an hour of heavy rain. And when that rain was coming down, we were taking shelter in a supermarket car park, and we were mindful that things change so quickly here. We asked if there was anywhere higher we could go if we needed to. You can only imagine what's going through the minds of people whose homes have been totally destroyed. And so many people today that I've spoken to have said they are absolutely terrified of the idea that it's going to rain. So that storm will have put fear into so many people's hearts, especially people who don't even have a home at the moment, those people in the shelter. Now, we know that help has been sent to this region, around 1,000 soldiers helping the emergency services. Tomorrow, another 500 will arrive here. And despite the fact the government has said that they are pumping resources into Valencia, that Valencia hasn't been forgotten, many people in communities in this area simply don't believe it.
Yeah, Siobhan, it has been a similar tale from all the people that we've spoken to throughout the day across the region, a sense of real despair and real loss and real fear about what could come in the next few hours. I think we're all just going to have to wait and see what the weather brings overnight. Everybody's keeping everything crossed that it will pass. But the fear is, as Siobhan was saying, that the weather is going to continue to be bad, possibly a little further north, possibly up nearer towards Barcelona. But we will keep you informed on all this and the rest of the news from Spain. But for now, I'll hand you back to Barbara in the studio.
Jane, thank you. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor faced a rocky ride as they took to the road today to try to sell their tax-hiking budget. On a visit to a hospital in Coventry, Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves insisted that they were putting the country back on its feet and it would take time and money. But they conceded that in the short term, wages may rise by less than previously thought, and they were challenged by NHS staff on whether the cash they've promised the health service will be anything like enough. Meanwhile, market reaction during the day to the budget has also been less than positive. We'll have more on that in just a moment. First, though, this report from our deputy political editor, Sam Coates.
Taking her budget to the country, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister heading to the Midlands, one day after announcing their overhaul for the economy. But so far, it's not been a smooth ride.
And then, the scan is done here.
This is where much of the new spending will be going, billions more in funding to come for the NHS. But the scale of the borrowing needed has already unnerved the markets. And that was paired with tax hikes that voters were told not to fear.
Prime Minister, for years you told voters that Labour would fix public services, not by tax rises or borrowing, but from growth. And yesterday's budget completely undermined, ran totally counter to that argument and that promise. Why should people trust you?
What we did in the budget yesterday was do the only thing that a responsible government would do, which was to fix the damage that we inherited.
You're conveniently forgetting the central argument you made ahead of the election. That was why growth was going to pay for public services. That is why you argued that Labour could be trusted. That is why you argued you were different from Jeremy Corbyn. And now you've just forgotten about that argument.
Not at all. This is a budget for growth. And as you'll see from the growth forecasts, the significant growth in the early years, it flattens a bit, and then over 10 years there's growth again. That's not the height of our ambition.
Surrounded by the budget's big winners. And now, watch this exchange. Here, the Prime Minister promising staff there could be even more cash to come.
Patient safety is at risk.
Yeah.
How can we have some assurance that, the money will go towards that?
What we did in the budget yesterday is the first step, the down payment, if you like, down that road to make sure that you can do your jobs better and we can have the NHS that we need.
The Prime Minister clear that not every problem in the NHS will be fixed in this budget. There's a queue of other public services that will need more cash too, from defence to education, social care. After the biggest tax-raising budget in decades, will this government still need to come back for more? And if so, from where? Businesses have been drilling into the numbers for the tax hike announced this week. Already clear this extra cost is going to hurt. Were you surprised by the scale of taxes put on businesses like yours?
Yeah, it's crazy. For an SME that's employing, why tax being employee? Because we are. I'm Deidre & Sorin is a company of people. We employ.
So working people who are here might get smaller pay rises than they would have done because of this tax rise.
It's going to end up to the employment, yes.
Friction over tax hikes, and the markets are worried about extra borrowing. There's big holes left to fill. Is there any way through? Sam Coates, Sky News, Coventry.
Well, Downing Street has sought to play down concerns about the market reaction to the budget. During the day, the pound has fallen and the cost to the government of borrowing money has gone up. So should ministers be worried? Our economics and data editor Ed Conway has this analysis.
Yesterday, after the budget, Rachel Reeves was asked by my colleague Beth Rigby what she thought about the market reaction to this statement. This is what she had to say.
The markets, the gilt yields are rising. Investors are worried about your budget. Gilt yields are going up.
Well, what I saw straight after the budget was that the FTSE had increased and gilt yields had fallen.
They're going up.
Well, I haven't seen those latest market moves, but the combination of our stability rule that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts and investment rule to ensure that we can invest alongside business should give markets and investors confidence to invest in Britain.
So she didn't think there was a big reaction, but in fact, actually, overnight, markets have been responding to what's happened in this budget. And it's not a particularly enthusiastic response. It kind of comes back to this. This is showing you how much the government was planning to borrow. So the last government, they were planning to borrow just over £300 billion in the coming years. And compare that to what Rachel Reeves has unveiled in her budget, over £460 billion worth of borrowing. And actually, the difference between those two is just over £140 billion of extra borrowing. The issue is, if you're going to try and borrow that money, you need to borrow it off someone. You need to go out there into financial markets and they need to lend it to you. And those lenders, they seem pretty unenthusiastic about what's happening. And you can see two hallmarks of that. First of all, the pound has weakened quite considerably. Just over the past 2 days, we're talking about the biggest fall in the benchmark. This is actually a kind of a basket of different currencies. The biggest fall in this index in 18 months. Also, you don't want to see gilt yields going up. This is essentially the interest rate at which the government has to be charged. That has gone up to the highest level that we've seen since last November. So two things, as a Chancellor, you really don't want to see after a budget, notwithstanding your first budget. It's worth saying, though, this is not the mini budget. So this is basically showing you how much those gilt yields have increased just in the last few days, the cumulative increase. And certainly they've gone up, and Rachel Reeves won't want to see that. But this is how much they went up after the mini-budget. It's leagues of difference, and you can see that was a real crisis moment for the UK economy and for financial markets. This is heading a little bit in that direction, but not by the same margin. So that's one thing that's not as much of a concern, not that there's going to be a crisis, but the real thing I think that worry the Treasury is what this does for their leeway in terms of how much room they have to spend in the future. Because the Office of Budget Responsibility, they said essentially the amount of money that you've got to spend in the coming years is slightly determined by those interest rates we saw a moment ago. And if those interest rates, this is their forecast for where they're heading in the future, if those rates get higher, then you potentially break your fiscal rules. You lose your kind of headroom that you have. And so far, because they've gone up by so much more than expected, they are more than halfway towards that danger zone. And that in turn means if you get to that level, that this government would have to potentially change its plans and it wouldn't have enough room to borrow.
Farmers, including Jeremy Clarkson, have expressed concerns that new inheritance tax rules in the budget will mean that they will be forced to sell land in order to pay. The National Farmers Union says the measure is disastrous for family farms and will deny future generations the ability to carry on producing British food. Sky's Fraser Maud reports now from York.
I really am, towards the end of my tether.
Do these people not understand where food comes from in this country?
The industry is on its knees. It's on its knees.
My primary concern is actually for my kids here.
Halloween isn't the only thing giving our farmers a scare this week. Many say the first Labour budget for over a decade has been disastrous for small farms and their future. Paul Tompkins raises a herd of 400 dairy cows on a 300-acre farm near York. He and thousands like him fear that the new £1 million limit on inheritance tax relief on farmland will rob his children of their farming legacy.
I went into the budget feeling quite optimistic, but came out feeling completely winded. I thought that this budget was going to be about helping working people. Yet, if that was the desire, then why am I worried that we're going to be fleeced as soon as a death happens in our family?
The government's assertion is that only around 2,000 of the largest estates a year will be affected. Some financial experts agree.
It still means they'll be significantly more generously treated than the rest of us, and still more generously treated, actually, than farms used to be in decades past. The changes will affect actually a remarkably small number of some of the most valuable farms. The majority will still not be affected by this.
But those criticising the announcement say up to 70,000 farms could suffer. DEFRA figures show about three-quarters of England's farms are smaller holdings of less than 100 hectares. Last year, England's farms made an average profit of £86,000, but 17% of them made no profit at all.
One way to avoid inheritance tax is to hand down your assets 7 years before you die. The problem with that, of course, is that no one knows exactly when that's going to be, and it also means that the farmer then can't borrow against his assets or apply for certain environmental schemes.
A U-turn on the announcement seems unlikely, but farmers like Paul maintain the only fair and reasonable thing the Chancellor can do to protect our farming future and keep food costs down is to completely reverse her decision. Fraser Maud, Sky News, York.
The health ministry in Lebanon says 45 people have been killed in Israeli strikes in the last 24 hours. Israel insists that it's targeting the Hezbollah militant group and trying to minimize civilian casualties. As the fighting continues, Israel has issued new evacuation orders for people living in parts of Lebanon. The orders center on Baalbek, a city of more than 80,000 people and surrounding towns. And people living in these villages have also been told by Israel to leave their homes. Sky's Ivor Bennett has been speaking to people in Kob Elias, where people fleeing their homes have been arriving.
In Lebanon right now, there is a frantic race to create shelter. Buildings like this technical college are being stripped to make room for those in need. Iman and her family are among those moving in. They fled from the eastern Baalbek region in the face of Israeli airstrikes. All they have are the clothes on their back.
We were so scared, so we left our houses, we left our belongings, and we left everything because we had to find somewhere safe for us and our children.
The warning to evacuate came just hours before the missiles fell. Iman's village was among those to be hit. Israel says it only targets Hezbollah infrastructure and doesn't intend to harm civilians, but try telling that to those who lived here.
They are targeting the houses of civilians. They are striking randomly. They destroyed properties and killed people. What have we done wrong? What is the guilt of these children? We don't side with anyone. We are public sector workers. We are farmers. We are not fighting.
In the nearby town of Zakhle, there's no space for anyone else. At this school, new arrivals are turned away. Ali's here with his 4-year-old grandson, who's escaped the bombs, but not the fear.
Every time he hears the drone, he runs to me to hide, shouting, "Grandpa, drone, drone." I tell him, "Grandson, this is an aeroplane. Don't be afraid. It loves us." I tell him these things so he doesn't get traumatized.
More than 1.2 million people have been displaced by this war in Lebanon. That's a fifth of the country's population. And the problem now is finding somewhere for them to go. Towns like this say they're already full. In Israel today, a renewed push for a ceasefire, with US mediators meeting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But there's still no agreement, and all the time the attacks continue on both sides of the border. Ivor Bennett, Sky News in eastern Lebanon.
More than 400 alleged victims or witnesses have come forward with allegations of sexual misconduct against former Harrods owner Mohammed Al-Fayed. The first letter of claim has been sent to the London department store, marking the start of the formal legal process. Sky's Rob Harris reports.
3 more survivors of Mohammed Al-Fayed going public. Jen, Lindsay and Gemma. Seeking justice, trying to expose their former boss as a predatory monster, and now urging a boycott of Harrods. As the Justice for Harrods Survivors group reveals, more than 400 people, including alleged victims and potential witnesses, have now come forward. Catherine, once a personal assistant to Al-Fayed, telling of confronting the billionaire.
He tried to force himself upon me in his office, and I fought him off and told him that, under no uncertain terms, that I was only a PA and that wouldn't be happening, and I was basically out of a job shortly after that. He came in the next day and my desk had gone.
14 months after his death, the scope of the alleged abuse by Al-Fayed is expanding across his business empire. Ronnie Gibbons is the first former Fulham player to waive her anonymity, telling of being trapped and assaulted in his office above Harrods after being summoned from the football club she captained.
As difficult as it's been very empowering, and I know that by speaking out we are making it harder for this kind of behaviour to be tolerated anywhere. I know we are making it easier for others to speak up.
Survivors who thought they were alone, now united in a mission with lawyers to expose Al-Fayed.
Nearly all of the ladies that we act for have said that nobody's ever listened to them. Nobody's actually taken what they said seriously.
The formal legal process against Harrods has now begun, and lawyers are anticipating hundreds more claims. Harrods continues to insist it is a very different organisation to the one Mohammed Al-Fayed owned until 2010, and that it is utterly appalled by the allegations of sexual misconduct. It's not swift settlements sought by survivors, but all the evidence gathered against Mohammed Al-Fayed. And lawyers are appealing for more alleged victims and those who facilitated the abuse to come forward. Rob Harris, Sky News, Central London.
The United States says it believes 8,000 North Korean soldiers in Russia will be sent into combat against Ukraine in the coming days. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he estimates a total of 10,000 North Korean troops are currently deployed in Russia. He says Russia has been training them in artillery and basic infantry operations, indicating they intend to use them in frontline operations.
As many as 8,000 of those North Korean forces have been deployed to the Kursk region. We've not yet seen these troops deploy into combat against Ukrainian forces, but we would expect that to happen in the coming days.
A former soldier accused of escaping from Wandsworth Prison has told a jury he offered to spy for Iran to further British national security interests. Daniel Khalife denies committing an act prejudicial to the safety or interests of the state, eliciting information about members of the armed forces, and escaping from lawful custody. A man has been arrested after 22 tons of cheese worth over £300,000 was stolen from a manufacturer in London. Neil's Yard Dairy in Southwark says it delivered more than 950 wheels of cheddar to someone it claims was a fraudster posing as a distributor. Let's go to the U.S. election now, and voters continue to be torn between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, with divisions not only being drawn along state lines, but also between towns, streets, and even families. Opinion polls have Donald Trump and Kamala Harris neck and neck, with everything coming down to the crucial swing states. In North Carolina, early voting shows the candidates almost tied at a third of the vote each, with another third of votes cast by unaffiliated voters. Now, in 2020, Donald Trump narrowly won the state, but Democrats are hoping they can flip it back to blue. Mark Stone reports now from the city of Kannapolis, a place which could be pivotal in the race to the White House.
Two different directions, starkly different. At its simplest, that is what this is all about. Kannapolis, North Carolina, is America's suburbia, middle class, leafy. Donald Trump won this town's district by just 9 votes in 2020.
It is precisely this sort of suburban community in a swing state where Harris and the Democrats hope that they can make gains.
I'm going with Trump and Vance,
yeah,
president.
Yeah, I'm his wife, and I'm going with Harris.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not a Trumper.
No?
No, we all know what he is. Please.
So there's the divide, there are the judgments. But of the issues driving the decision, one thing dominates, always: the economy. And on one street in this one town, reflections of how people feel. That will determine how they vote. In the Sabor Grill, we meet Riley Mullery, 23, babysitting between jobs.
I went to the store the other day and got a full cart. Usually that costs $150, if that. It was almost $400 for a full cart of just regular household needs. I hope that that can be solved.
The waiter here is 18-year-old William, voting for the first time.
The last time when my grandparents voted for Trump, everything economical was fine. Right now, everything's too expensive, and all these unemployment rates are way higher than they were before, and it's getting worse and worse.
Here's the thing, though. Prices are coming down. Unemployment is down, too. Perception and reality, they don't match. It's all about how people feel, and for many, what they remember before under Donald Trump.
He's very rough around the edges, okay, but he knew what he was doing. And I think this time around, now that we've had that 4-year gap without him, and they've seen what happened, the scales tipped a little. Everybody's like, oh, maybe he wasn't that bad.
Over the road at Decadence Popcorn, Dwayne Jackson is the boss.
A lot of the small businesses don't understand tariffs.
And where his neighbors see hope and opportunity, he sees a con, like Trump's plan for tariffs on China, which he believes will push up prices here.
If you're not focusing on what the person's actually saying, then you're going to go according to the gimmicks.
I'm going to suggest that maybe you're saying that Trump is a gimmick.
Yes, I will go on the record as saying that.
And in these few swing states, these are the towns, these are the people who will decide this election. Mark Stone, Sky News in North Carolina.
And of course, we'll have live coverage of the U.S. election on Sky News on Tuesday, the 5th of November. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. And among the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front of the Telegraph after yesterday's budget. The headline, markets turn on Reeves over tax burden. We'll be right back.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. More than 150 people are now known to have died in Spain's flash floods. A major search continues for large numbers still missing. As the Prime Minister and the Chancellor take to the road to sell their budget, there are jitters in the markets over the level of UK borrowing. And more than 400 alleged victims and witnesses have come forward in the investigation into the claims of sexual abuse by the former Harrods owner, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome both. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, in the wake of the budget, The Telegraph leads with the adverse reaction on the financial markets. The headline, markets turn on Reeves over tax burden. The Financial Times says investor worries have driven up the cost of government borrowing and pushed down the value of the pound against the dollar. The Express, meanwhile, carries an admission by what it called a remorseless chancellor that the budget will hit workers in the pay packet. The Eye, meanwhile, carries a warning from economists that interest and mortgage rates will now fall more slowly than had been expected. The Guardian says the Chancellor has also been warned that she'll need to find another £9 billion to maintain public services. While the Mail says the budget will cost charities an extra £1.4 billion, jeopardising jobs and the help that they provide. The Sun looks at the plight of farmers now facing increased inheritance tax after changes in the budget. The paper calls it a kick in the bullocks. The Times focuses on the soaring welfare bill, half of which it's predicted will be taken up in sickness benefits by the end of this parliamentary term. The Mirror leads on the flash floods in Spain with the headline, Trapped in a Nightmare. The Metro reports that 400 alleged victims and witnesses of the late Harrods owners' reported sexual abuse of women have begun legal action. The store's current owners say they're appalled at the claims and are investigating. And finally, The Star leads on what it says is a plan to ban children singing the song, What Should We Do with the Drunken Sailor? And we'll tell you what they've changed that line to a little later. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Thank you both so much for being with us. Lots on the budget, obviously. Day 2 now, and we're getting proper reaction from the markets now. So let's start by looking at the FT, front page there. And this is about borrowing costs tick up as investors digest Reeves' budget debt demands. So borrowing costs up, the pound down. Richard, what have you made of the market reaction and the coverage in the papers?
Me, Steve.
Yeah, Steve, sorry.
Not that surprising, really. By the way, I think we should preface it with, when you read out the front pages, it is worth acknowledging that most British papers are very right-wing and we're going to try and destroy this budget. Not all of them, and not the FT. In terms of the market jitters, she is borrowing a lot of money. But the alternative would be not to borrow a lot of money. And the money is going into infrastructure projects which are desperately needed, capital spending. And everyone agreed that the election theme with 2 words, nothing works in Britain, and you need to find the money. Now, the economy's not growing. So how do you find the money? The answer is a combination of borrowing and tax rises. But the market is jittery, and that will make the Treasury and Rachel Reeves very nervous. My guess is, and I'll probably prove to be completely wrong, that over time, quite quickly, it'll calm down because she was being quite fiscally responsible. She was raising taxes to fill holes in public spending, not to sort of borrow recklessly. But let's see, maybe they'll go crazy. I mean, markets are unpredictable agencies.
Oh, well, I think markets are far more predictable than politicians most of the time because they're reacting to the detail. And it's what you say. We are in day 2 now. And so you do get a little bit of time to digest the Red Book. I mean, all you get from the Chancellor's statement is the things that she wants you to focus on and the things that are required for her to sort of mention at the dispatch box. I think what's interesting about this is that, look, it's not as bad as Truss's mini-budget. It's sort of getting there, but the impact is a lot lower than what happened at the mini-budget. So you would expect some market reaction. You would imagine that the Treasury has done some scenario planning for this market reaction to think about how they're starting to think about calming the markets down. The problem here, and what the markets are thinking about, or what people who are giving you loans and debt are thinking about, is she going to have to come back sooner to ask for more money? Where is she going to find tax rises if she still has a shortfall anywhere? And where is she going to find more borrowing? And how is she going to service that debt from the government balance sheet if that's what she needs to do? And that's a reaction to.
Okay, let's take a look at the front page of the Eye as well. Just a lot of the impact from this budget. This specifically, front page of the Eye, is about interest rates. Now, they're apparently or expected to fall more slowly after the budget. That's a warning from some economists, because we had been hearing, hadn't we, Steve, some pretty optimistic sounds about, them being cut potentially even twice in a row, and interest rates have been so high, causing so much pain to so many mortgage holders.
Yeah, and the stories are interconnected. It's because if the markets start panicking, it becomes more expensive to borrow money, and the borrowing is going up, you're in a sort of nightmarish circle, which is very difficult to escape from. And then interest rates have to go up as a response, which happened under Liz Truss. And we're not in Liz Truss territory here, I should stress. But I ask again to those who are responding in this way, should she not have borrowed money? And should we just let the infrastructure of Britain collapse, or try and do something about it? And in doing something about it, generate the growth, this elusive phenomenon in Britain, growth. It's very interesting when the growth projections came out compared with the United States, 10% growth, and Britain's struggling at 1% and so on. So maybe this borrowing can generate growth. But it's nerve-wracking in the first few days.
Look, I think that there's an interesting way to think about this. One is, yes, she needs to borrow, but what it feels like she's borrowing for is not going to be productive growth. So I think the proof is in the pudding. What is she going to spend the money on? Or who is going to decide how that money is going to be spent? Yeah, and is it going to be productive? So that's one point. I think the other point is that the front of the eye, we're talking about interest rates, we're talking about the individual measures that are in there, farmers and the inheritance tax on that. So really what the eye is talking about is altogether, what does this mean for individuals? We've just talked about what it means for markets and government borrowing. What does this actually mean for the pound in your pocket? And it's not good. Now, she did have a really difficult choice to make, and none of this was going to be easy. I think one of the challenges, if you were thinking about being really radical, is could she have done something that wasn't just sort of tinkering around the edges and playing with the rules, for example? Could she have been a little bit more radical about the way that she was thinking about tax to sort of bring in private capital from elsewhere in order to pay for those big infrastructure projects that we might need? And I think we might look back on this in 20 years' time and think that that was the missed opportunity, because growth has been bad since the financial crisis. And I think we have to recognise that there is something that's wrong fundamentally in the economy, and this budget has not addressed that point.
Yeah, Let me just pull up a front page, just The Guardian, so we bring that into the discussion as well. Front page of The Guardian, Reeves told she will have to raise a further £9 billion for public services, which of course is key, as in it's not even enough the way it is.
Well, that's the twist, isn't it? People are sort of claiming to be shocked at the level of tax rises and borrowing and so on. But if you actually look at the figures as projected for most of this Parliament, the public spending settlements are tight to the point that we are kind of facing the prospect of, to use an imprecise term, austerity. And therefore, it's right that she might have to raise taxes again just to keep public services going, unless we get this economic growth. To answer Salma's point, they have tried to get private sector investment. They had that huge investment summit conveniently held before the budget. Not as many might have turned up after the budget, to try and leverage in private sector investment and private capital.
Look,
but it's not going to be enough.
A summit is not going to get people to come in. What's going to get people to come in is to see that there's going to be a value on their return, and the only way that they're going to see that is that any value, any uptick that they get in their investment isn't going to be taxed away. That people look at the numbers, and that's the cold, hard truth.
Yeah, which raises the question. So income tax was ruled out, wrongly in my view, but it was ruled out. National insurance for employees, ruled out. VAT, ruled out. Corporation tax, ruled out. So where do you get the money from in an economy which is not growing? Now, there is an argument that by taxing, you make the economy less capable of growing. But the alternative route has been tested for quite some time. And nothing has... the growth in the British economy has been sluggish, basically, since the financial crash. And we haven't had a major kind of reflection on how we respond to the shocks of the financial crash, Brexit, COVID. I mean, as the Times reports, too many people aren't working. So there are huge fundamental issues. But I come back to the point that money did need to be raised.
Steve Summer, we're going to have to leave it there. Coming up, the salary of the government's new value for money czar comes under fire on the front of the Daily Telegraph. We'll tell you more in just a few minutes.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Thank you both for looking at the papers with us. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph now. A story still on the front page. It's value for money czar earns 50K for 1 day a week. So the equivalent of £247,000 a year, obviously more than the Prime Minister's pay. Salma, what do you make of this?
So I would like to start by saying I don't want to cast any aspersions on David Goldstone for taking this job, but It is one of those stories. It's such a small part of the budget who is responsible for this new magical office for value for money, which in itself is a bit of a ridiculous thing. But now his whole career history and CV has been dragged up because he's going to earn the equivalent of a £247,000 salary. So immediately, you know, you can say instinctively, well, that doesn't sound like it's value for money. And, you know, everything that he's done previously, whether it be on the Olympics or, you know, anything in relation to High Speed 2, which he was also part of, is that question of, like, you know, does he really understand what value for money is? And look, he's very experienced. This is the kind of guy you probably want in an organisation like that that's watching the pennies. He can't be held responsible for everything that's gone wrong, but it's a classic post-budget story that makes people sort of scratch their heads and maybe be a little bit unkind about the intentions.
There's a comical side to it. The value for money body is costing a fortune. However, by the way, there are 3 anti-budget stories on the Telegraph front page, so that's where they're coming from. However, there is a serious side to this, which is, now I've spent the whole of the first half discussing with Salma my belief that we need this public spending. But I also believe that every halfpenny has to be accounted for so that voters can get a sense that the money is being well spent, or else this project will fail catastrophically. However, I don't believe this is the way to do it. I think that the agencies responsible for spending this money need to be held to account in all kinds of fresh ways. I would even, the really big projects, I would say, right, you're not elected MPs, but you're going to come and answer to the House of Commons. New forms of accountability so we don't get the HS2 waste of inefficiencies again. I'm not sure this is the way to do it, but this is an attempt to do it, to make sure every halfpenny is well spent.
Can I ask how much is a halfpenny in modern money?
Well, let's say a few pounds, you know. So, you know, he might be being well paid or not, I don't know. But that's the way to do it, to hold the spenders to detailed account. And that hasn't happened with HS2, with some public projects, etc. And it needs to do with this new money. But I support the new money being raised.
Let's go to another story that actually has been making a lot of headlines about the budget, and this is inheritance tax and its impact on farmers. So front page of The Sun, and I'm going to read it properly now. It serves me right for not reading my scripts before I kick in the bullocks. So...
I mean, The Sun's having a great run of front pages.
And this is about basically inheritance tax for farmers, which is now, I think it's the £1 million threshold, and now it would be 50% relief effective rate at 20%. But the accusation is that this will stop a lot of farmers handing over the farm to family, and you know, it has a huge implication for British food production.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Sun have gone for the government. They were quite pro it yesterday because it didn't put up petrol. I think it should have put up petrol, and the Sun is not really rewarding it for very long because it's gone for this today. Yeah. All I would say is the tax expert Dan Needle has tweeted in great detail why this is nowhere near as punitive as some of the headlines have stated. And we haven't got time to go into the detail, but it's worth reading.
Yes, Dan Needle on X has talked about actually how the number of farms that might be subject to this tax is, you know, quite small. I think the only thing that I would say is that whilst that may be true in terms of tax, what does that actually mean in terms of production? Because if you look at the Department for Environment, you know, there are huge things happening there around food security, around biodiversity, around what farming actually needs. And so being able to have this passed down in this way through generations, rather than it being sold and, you know, it creating productive farming for profit, which would be catastrophic for our environment, I think those are the kinds of worries that are going to emerge around this tax. It's not the unintended consequence of just the tax by itself, but actually what happens to the environment and food security.
All right, it's definitely a story that I think we'll continue to talk about in weeks to come. Steve, Salma, for the moment, thank you both so much. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the number of deaths in the floods in eastern Spain now rises to more than 150.
They keep telling us that they want